Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to him and Blake Silverman on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. You should be reading all of O2's work over on the Detroit Free Press, soon to be off-season O, but I don't know that they were quite there yet. I don't know. Maybe we're getting there. The Substack, Motor City Soup Substack, not a lot of content right now. Still trying to figure out what to do there with the off-season. But if you are a subscriber, really appreciate it. Of course, if you're tuning in live or after the fact, rate, review, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. We will be taking you throughout the entirety of the Pistons off-season and into next season, of course, which is that offseason a little bit shorter this year since we got some playoff basketball. O2, before we get into today's episode, which will be a rundown of the Pistons roster, a little bit of a review of individual players and what to kind of look ahead for them in the offseason and next year. The NBA draft lottery. Thoughts?
You know, I was looking forward to not having thoughts this year. I actually don't have an issue with it. Like, I actually don't really have a problem with it. Take like Dallas being able to win on like a 1.8% chance. One, their chance to move into the top 4, I think, was like 8-something%, which is still low, but like it's not impossible. But I think it's good for a play-in team to be able to also still move up in the lottery. Maybe they can make it so that if you're the worst team, you can't fall all the way down to 5. Maybe they can tighten it a little bit to where you're still guaranteed top 4. But, you know, I'm cool with the chaos. I think the only thing I don't like is that it is an inherently bad deal for most fans because there's the anticipation aspect of it. And then, you know, most fan bases are getting their heart broken, you know, in some level based on essentially like just odds, right? So I like and seeing Pistons fans heartbroken 3 straight years after falling to 5, like I kind of see firsthand. Like I just think the format of it kind of sucks, but I don't mind the actual Dallas Mavs moving up. Conspiracies aside, all that, I get it. Like I don't have a big issue with it.
Yeah, I'm kind of whatever. Yeah, Wes says I struggle to care. It is what it is. It does the job to advertise. Like at the end of the day, like people were talking about it. The NFL podcast I listened to, the Chiefs specific podcast I listened to, talked about it for 5 minutes on their podcast whenever they're doing like NFL schedule release. I don't really care either necessarily. I understand people like QT, as you brought up, going from first to fifth shouldn't happen. At least one too many lottery teams. Ben says you should get better odds if you finish with a bottom 3 record in consecutive seasons. Like, I think there's all sorts of different ways. The one thing that like me and Sam talked about over on Game Theory was the one thing it's not doing that it was supposed to do was deter tanking. And it hasn't. Like teams are still tanking very aggressively, even without the guaranteed reward. And so like that, the whole idea of the lottery, in my opinion, wasn't to let the Hawks jump from 10-1 or the Mavericks jump from 11-1. It was to try to get teams to stop tanking throughout a season. And like that hasn't necessarily happened. But yeah, it is what it is. I'm not really overly worried about it. Derek Brown says, I've got 30 more stops on my UPS truck left, and I can't wait to finish off with the Pistons Pulse. So thank you, Derek. Hopefully we can make the next 55 minutes of your UPS delivery a little bit better. So let's get into this. We got 15 players to talk about here. And real quick here, Omari Sports Time says, exit interviews, you know.
There's not going to be player exit interviews. All we got was Trajan.
Okay, and we broke that down on the last episode with Sean Windsor. We broke down all of the quotes from him and everything we thought from Trajan's presser. I guess O2, we went over on Locked On Pistons, and you got to give your overall takeaways from the season and the series. You haven't necessarily got to do much of that. We had Sean on, we did the Trajan presser. Anything you want to get off your chest real quick, just in terms of overarching team 24-25 Pistons season?
Yeah, just beyond all the obvious stuff, you know, I think seeing how you played the Knicks and again came within a few possessions of, you know, either forcing game 7 or even winning that series if you tie it 2-2 on the missed call. But looking at what they've done to Boston, and, you know, obviously the Tatum injury is tragic, you know, but even before that, they were well on pace to win that game and go up 3-1. And, you know, by the time this goes on podcast episodes, we're recording live now. That series may be resolved already since this is game 5 tonight. But if you're the Pistons, you should, you already felt good about the season, but you should feel better seeing how well the Knicks have still played, how well they match up against the Celtics, how their wings have made life difficult for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And it didn't necessarily have that level of success with Cade. I think everything that's happened since then, there's no Ken Pound in the NBA or such thing as quality losses or anything. But I think you look at that series and it's just more evidence that this team's here. They're a good team. They've arrived and you can move forward, with the expectation on some level that, this should be something that they can sustain. So nothing super different, just in general, more evidence that this is a legit turnaround for this team.
I don't think Pistons fans will take a lot of solace in what I'm about to say, but I think it is a good compliment. I've heard Knicks people our guy GMAC, Andrew Claudio, make the comment that the Pistons series prepared the Knicks for what they're doing now. It brought out of the Knicks what needed to be brought out of them to actually compete in the East the way they needed to. And I do think it is a compliment to Detroit in the way they play the game and how competitive they were and all of that. So let's get into this. Let's get into this review. We're going to start with Jaden Ivey here. Obviously, an injury cut season for J.I. The broken leg, played 30 games, averaged 17.5 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, under a steal, under half a block, 3 turnovers on 46% from the field, 41% from 3, 73% from the free throw line. To me, this is the biggest quote unquote disappointment of the Pistons 24-25 season. It's not J.I.'s fault. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying not getting 65, 70 games, and most importantly, 6 playoff games from J.I. is probably the thing that is most disappointing. But going back a while now, what are your thoughts on J.I. in the 30 games we saw from him?
Yeah, I think he showed a lot of what you want us to see, especially just from a shooting standpoint, where he's at 41% on decent volume. I think he had 4 or 5 threes before he got hurt in that Magic game, and that was one of his better offensive games. He still has some things he has to work on. His finishing still wasn't quite as good as you would like it to be, but overall, he certainly took steps forward. I thought defensively he was a little bit more together and composed, and there wasn't anything that makes you worry about the future, right? I think in year 3 you want to see deliberate strides forward, and again, only 30 games, but I feel we did see some of that before he went down.
Yeah, I was looking at the shooting splits because I felt his 3-point shooting season in general was a little bit more up and down than what just the monthly shooting splits look like. It looks like he went through a short 7-game stretch here where he shot below 30%, but 7 games, a lot of people do that, right? It's the NBA. That's not a crazy thing. And then he came out of that 7-game stretch and had a 14-game stretch where he shot 46% from 3 on over 5 attempts. And obviously that was the stretch that led into the injury and all of that. So I'm excited about what we saw from him as a shooter. I'm really disappointed that we didn't get to see what it looked like in more substantial games and minutes with Cade, with Asar, right? Seeing those guys together. I've come on here and talked about a little bit of nervousness about running it back, quote unquote, with the same team. And people kind of said well, Bryce, you got to remember, these guys haven't played together. The K, J.I., Asar, Ron Holland or Harris or whoever, those lineups never really got to play together. So disappointing season from the standpoint we only got 30 games, but I do think it's important to highlight that we got a lot of pretty good basketball from Jaden Ivey in those 30 games, including what I think is continued improvement on the defensive end from him. J.I. is one of the more interesting off-season conversations. We've talked about this a little bit off air, maybe on the Pulse, again, over on Locked On Pistons. If you haven't checked that out, Omari and I went over there with Koo and recorded 2 separate episodes, one looking at the playoff series and one previewing the offseason. What do you expect, or answer how you want, O2. What do you expect to happen, or what do you think should happen with J.I. in this extension?
So I've said, just looking at what Houston did with Jalen Green, where he got 3 years, I believe 106, which, essentially kind of split the difference between paying a little bit above probably market value based on what he had shown thus far, but you get them under control while you have some other young guys developing. And then, you know, if the deal does work out for him, then he hits the market sooner and, you know, can potentially get an even bigger deal. You know, and I think the flip side of that is if it doesn't work out, then obviously a smaller commitment from Houston's end. So, like, I think I think his season, even in 30 games, was better than Jalen Green. And, you know, just with inflation over, you know, this season from last, like, it might be a bit above 106, but just from a cap percentage standpoint, you know, if I were the front office, I would be interested in something like that. You know, for J.I., you know, it's, you know, like, to what extent do you want to bank on that future upside, especially coming off of an injury, right? You know, are you going to be full strength immediately next season? Like, we have to get into a rhythm. So there's a lot of factors to consider both ways. But, like, I think we've seen the other teams in this scenario kind of split the difference with shorter deals still for a good amount of money. And the Pistons could do that if they want. But where are you on this, Bryce?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more divided because I think I know what J.I. is. And based off what I think he is, O2, I would agree with you. Even in that scenario, and the thing with Jalen Green's contract is it's a little shorter. So anytime a contract's a little bit shorter, you know, Keith Smith has said that, you know, it's hard to have a bad 1 year contract. Obviously, we're talking about more than 1 year, but when it's only 3, which is what Jalen Green's is, and I think it is a player option on the end, the risk is less. But the worry is, what if J.I. actually is the number 2 option on the team? Now you only have that guy on the hook for 3 years, and then now you're already looking at extending him or him hitting free agency or whatever. So I would understand that this is the hardest one for me because I still think there's variance in J.I.'s outcome in terms of he could be the number 2 option on this team. He also could have to settle into a 6-man role. And then what I'm struggling at, like, how quote unquote bad is that contract O2 if he is the 6-man? Is it catastrophic? Is it rough? Is it fine? You know, what is it if he settles into this? Because that's still a valuable role, but you still want it to be on a quality contract. And so that's where I'm at with it. I understand where you're at, though. So Wes brings up 4 years and descending. So in that, you know, that $30 million, I love... Here's what I would love. You get a descending club option contract, you're probably going to be okay by me. Like that, I love those type of contracts. And it's kind of like Isaiah Stewart's contract, right? At the time, people may have like raised their eyebrows a little bit. Flat 15 million, so not descending, but flat club option on the end of it. The risk of that was much lower. And if Stu performs at the way we saw in the regular season and can stay healthy in the playoffs, I think it looks really good, O2.
Yeah, I think so as well. And yeah, again, you mentioned that deal. You're not sure what it's going to be beforehand, but if it works out, then you have a good player under contract for a few years. You know, I think the other aspect of that is that even if it's like, let's say Ivy ends up being more of like a 6-man type of player, you only have to ride that out for, you know, 2 years until it becomes expiring or, you know, whatever else. And obviously it would kick in after next season, you know, so that's taking you through 2029 or so until that's off the books. So you would have to extend, you know, potentially a Sar and maybe one other guy like in that stretch. So that's the other thing to consider too is like, what's the worst case scenario? Like if you do end up paying him that, and then how does that affect how you navigate those other deals? Because the cap's also still going up. So, you know, so 33 or 34 a year today is not going to be what it is 2 years from now. Like however that math ends up breaking out.
QT says, you know, solid third scoring option. Wish we could have seen him in the playoffs get tested. Scott says re-sign Jay like he's the third best offensive option. YouTube user brings up a good point. Descending deal makes it difficult to extend them. I think the difference here is maybe with YouTube, maybe you could throw out a number at us. I think the difference here is like YouTube user says ascending deal with non-guaranteed year 4, team option year 5. Like, okay, there's a little less risk in that as well. To me, it's the risk mitigation. So sure, if you wanted ascending, but if you can get him like to agree to a non-guaranteed and a team option, and which is essentially a 3-year deal, sure. Like I think we're all having the same conversation of feeling like we want some sort of risk mitigation in regards to a JI contract. So, and he says 30 million. Let's keep going here. Marcus Sasser probably didn't have quite the year I thought, O2, just because I thought he'd be a little bit more ingrained in the rotation. Ended up playing 57 games, 14 minutes a game, 6.5 points, 46% from the field, 38% from three, 84% from the free throw line. I guess more for me, did you think Sasser would have a bigger role? And more specifically, I guess with him, I think it is more interesting. What do you think his role is moving into next season?
So the interesting thing about Sass is that the role he had coming into the season where he, essentially was, on the cusp of the rotation, depending on just what they needed, like backcourt wise, was worse than what was expected. And then when J.I. went down, there was probably a 15 or so game stretch where, he was in a much bigger featured role, and then obviously when they got Dennis Schroeder and that cut back into Sasser's minutes. I think the most encouraging thing is just that he was efficient. Like, I remember he started off hot last season and he had to cool it off as the year went on. And this season, he didn't play as many minutes, but he sustained that efficiency the entire year. And if his role is going to be sort of like that off the bench, you don't play every night, but when you come in, it's because you need a bucket and he could do that. Like, I thought we saw a lot of that. On the other end, still has probably some growth ahead as a primary ball handler. And I thought he was pretty solid defensively too, especially for his size. For him, it's just really what's the ideal role for him on this team, like in a universe where you have Schroeder and J.I. And, I think that's probably what you ask long term, because this past season, I think he was more of like that off the bench, kind of go get a bucket specialist rather than a true point guard, like firmly in that rotation.
So I don't know if Marcus Sasser would be happy with this role, but I think if Marcus Sasser is your 5th guard, your 11th man, you're in a pretty good situation as a team. And I think I would be excited if whatever happens this offseason, if that's the role he comes back into next season. And as Michael says, good value for his price tag. That's right. Like, he less than $3 million next year. He has the rookie option for the next season at, a little over 5. And then it'll get interesting in terms of after that. But I think if he can be happy in that role, I think it's a role he can be really good in. Right? Somebody misses a game, somebody rolls an ankle, somebody's in foul trouble. Maybe you need just a jolt of some buckets. I think Sasser being that 5th guard, right? Like, you have Cade and J.I., and then you have Beasley and Schroeder, or whoever it ends up being, and then it's Sasser. I feel really good about that. I don't hate, if people want him as the 4th guy, like, hey, we don't need Dennis Schroeder because it can be Marcus Sasser. I feel more comfortable with him as being the 5th one. A few other, we definitely need to talk about this one. Simone Fontecchio. I will say, listen, I thought Simone was going to be a starter to start the season, and that did not happen, obviously. I thought a lot, I want to start positively real quick, O2. I thought Simone was better defensively than what I would have guessed coming into the season. I thought he had a solid defensive season, and I thought he had a really good offensive rebounding season. The problem with that is, the number one thing you need to talk about with Simone Fontecchio when you talk about his season is his shot making. And just straight up, he struggled, right? He made 34% of his threes in the regular season. He eventually fell out of the playoff rotation. And I think the best thing you can hope for is just a bounce back season from Simone in terms of knocking down shots.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where I'm at too. Like, I think when Simone is on the floor, he does bring positives, but just his shot not falling, I think really just kind of limits the way that you can play him, and then for him to, shoot 33.5%, after shooting 42% or 43% the previous season. And then he shot around 40% in Utah. I know he had that toe surgery during the off season, and the extent that just affected things mechanically, only he can really say, but it did sound like that was a factor. And, maybe with another off season of, rehab and being able to let it heal, he'll be able to get that back. Cause Simone, if he can knock down threes, and he's a rotation guy, and that's really all it is. He has to be able to knock down threes. That's literally it.
I agree. Matthew says, hey, your best friend from far, far away is here. What's up? Appreciate you being here. Always appreciate the support. And guys, we have some of your comments and questions starred. Wes will strategically dump them into the conversation where they fit. Like, I know there was an Isaiah Stewart comment, and there's a Robin comment, and some of that stuff to Cade's Batman. Wes will dump those onto the screen, and we will discuss those as they hit. The last two guys here before we go to break, Paul Reed, Lindy Waters. I don't have a ton of thoughts on Lindy Waters. I will say with Paul Reed, I respect somebody in his role. And Sasser in the same way. Paul Reed, being the 3rd center, came in and he did his job whenever it was asked of him. It felt like whenever they needed him, foul trouble, injury, whatever, he came in. We saw the limitations. We saw it against the Knicks. I love Paul Reed. He's just way smaller than Mitchell Robinson 0-2. Like there's a physicality and size difference there that holds him up. I would have no issues with Paul Reed being the third center on this team next year. I think the third center was shown how valuable it is for a team that's trying to win and compete. I will also say the third center spot is a position I have pegged at number 37 for the Pistons draft pick in the second round, depending on how the draft shakes out. There we go. YouTube user says Maxime Reynaud is replacing B-Ball Paul. Maxime Reynaud is one of my favorites in this class. If Detroit could land him at 37, I think that would be huge for the Pistons. We won't get too much into that, but any thoughts on Paul Reed and Lindy Waters? Just Paul Reed both are unrestricted free agents, small cap holds, but are unrestricted free agents this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, you reiterated my thoughts exactly on B-Ball Paul. Like for his role, like I think he's really phenomenal just as like that energetic third big who can get you some rebounds, finish some dunks, just the basic stuff. I do think from a size standpoint, they were a little bit small compared to the Knicks in the playoffs, which we saw. And Beef Stew's a little undersized too, but he's like 250, so he's not giving up much weight. And obviously strong as well. Paul Reed is like listed at 210, and like that's a pretty substantial difference. So again, like I think he's good as a third big. I think he really fit this team well. He would be great coming back next season. I also agree with you where, there are probably some guys at 37 where if you could get a little bit bigger at that third big spot, then it's probably worth looking at as well.
Michael asked about bird rights for Reed. I believe that there are non-bird because of the mechanisms they did during the regular season to lower the cap hit and all of that. So we'll talk about these other guys, but the free agents are Hardaway Jr., Schroeder, Beasley, Waters, Paul Reed. They have bird rights on Tim Hardaway Jr. and Lindy Waters, early bird on Schroeder, non-bird on Beasley and Paul Reed. That comes from Spotrac, our guy Keith Smith over there. Somebody asked, who is Maxime Reynaud? Maxime Reynaud is a stretch big out of Stanford, very skilled offensive player that's just very interesting to me, especially as a early second round pick. We got through 5 guys there. We got 5 more to go in the next segment, so we will go to a short break. Omari, when we come back, let's start off with some Jalen Duren talk.
All right, we're back with segment 2. And we're going to talk about Jalen Duren. And I think the bottom line with him is that he got better as the year went on and as the stakes got higher, which there's a lot you could nitpick as far as pros and cons. But curious to hear how you feel about this, Bryce. But I think overall I came away impressed with how he was able to, rise to the moment and really show what he could do as the team had to rely on him harder.
Yeah, so real quick, Jalen Duren here, 12 points, 10 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 2.7 assists, 1.8 stocks, 1.7 turnovers, played 78 games, 26 minutes a night. And then in the playoffs, averaged a double-double, essentially 12 and 11, 3.5 assists, 1.7 turnovers, and played 34 minutes in those 6 games. And so I was impressed with Jalen Duren in terms of his growth. I thought we saw growth from him this season. I thought on the defensive end, specifically the defensive playmaking. And that's something at times I don't value maybe correctly or as much as others. It's like the whole DPOY and why I had Dyson Daniels a little lower. Like I want like the guy that just really sits down and guards you a little bit more than the guy that disrupts you. But that's a preference thing. I can still appreciate the impact that Jalen Duren has with his shot blocking, rim protection that at least grew this year. It's not like he's an elite rim protector, but it did grow this year. Yeah, as James says, vertical spacing and chemistry with Cade. We will talk about the extension. I think you and I are a little bit different there, maybe on the numbers. We'll see. But I think that was important defensively. I think there are other flaws that still need to grow. I think he showed some of his passing potential on the offensive end. And one thing that showed up at times later in the season was his touch around the rim. We know Jalen Duren can catch a lob and dunk it. Can Jalen Duren catch one, have a contest, jump, and hit a little hook shot and some of those things? That's the the area I want to continue to see grow with him. Any other thoughts on what this season looked like for him or the playoffs before we talk? He is one of the other players where the offseason does kind of matter to discuss a little bit.
Yeah, I think the other thing that really stood out with Duren in the playoffs, besides I think his defense just becoming a bit more, stout as the series went on, is just the sheer amount of areas he contributed in. And I think you look at the playmaking, especially late in games, and I think they began to lean on more and more as the series went on. The offensive rebounding and just his dominance on the boards in general. And they got crushed whenever Duren wasn't out there, just because of the size you're giving up, but he completely neutralized by himself. I feel like the strength advantage that New York had there. And then obviously the, lob catching and some of the scoring here and there. He does a lot on offense for this team that I think just the sheer amount of it really adds up. And I think his performance in the playoffs made me more excited for what he can become, seeing what he can become on that end in the future too, given that again, after K Tobias, he was probably one of their most important offensive players, in that top 3 or 4, I thought.
Marco says Jalen needs to develop the portal, Zubac, Lopez push shot in the short roll. He needs to have that option. I agree. I'm glad you brought up Zubac because the contract, and people are bringing up, Michael says Duren deserves the Claxton contract. YouTube user then responds, Claxton doesn't deserve the Claxton contract. The center market is fascinating because here's what I think is interesting with Jalen Duren. If I'm Jalen Duren, I say I'm better than Nick Claxton, who signed a 4-year, $97 million descending contract. And I don't think he's wrong. If I'm the Detroit Pistons, I say, yeah, but you're not better than Ivica Zubac, who just signed a 3-year, $16 million contract and is, roughly $20 million. And then you have the Jarrett Allen 3-year, $90 million contract. It's really hard to it's hard for me to grasp the 1-to-1 because I can see arguments from both sides of it in terms of where that contract needs to land. I think I am at the place where I would feel comfortable offering him an extension, where coming into the season, I don't even know that I would be there. That's not disrespectful to Jalen Duren. I don't know that I'm at a number where I think Jalen Duren would actually take that extension.
Yeah, and I think as we get deeper into the summer, we'll see which way the Pistons lean. But, I do think that there's a lot of incentive to have Duren come back next season and then, test restricted free agency. And I think by then, he's 22 years old, you have a better idea of what he'll look at as he gets closer to his peak. I also just want to see what contract year Duren looks like. I think that, we've seen a lot of players in that scenario, rise to the occasion. And, it's not that he needs that type of motivation, but to me, there's no downside to bringing him in next season. He's coming off of the fire of the postseason. And if you postpone, him and J.I. this summer, then you go into next summer and you're figuring out Duren, J.I. and Asar at the same time, which maybe it's good. Maybe after a full season with all 3 of those guys healthy, knock on wood, you'll be able to make a more informed decision. So, we'll see, how that goes. But, for all the reasons we talked about, I think there's a lot of reason for, the Pistons to wait till next offseason for that one.
Marco says Duren deserves the Zubac contract, essentially $20 million a year. I don't think Jalen Duren takes that, in my opinion. I think Jalen Duren would say no to that contract offer if it was 4 for $80 or something like that. And one real quick point here, Wes brings this up with some of Duren's flaws and some different things like that. The thing I will say is, if you don't think those two work together long term, which one are you going to choose? And I think that, comes into play here as well. I'm not saying they absolutely can't work together. I'm saying there are issues offensively with those two guys on the court together that occupy the same space. This is interesting to me, Michael. Lakers supposedly wanted Duren with Doncic. I think there's some truth to that. So, I didn't name Asar. My bad. Asar and Duren. My bad. Sorry. Asar and Duren. Omari had said something about Asar, and then in my head, I just pieced it all together. I meant Asar and Duren working together. I apologize, guys. It's last day of school tomorrow, and the end of the year has been.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay,
it's been something. We won't get. We have a whole episode of the life and times of Lakin Middle School, high school right now. So we will save that for not this. Isaiah Stewart is the next conversation. Not a whole lot of offseason conversation around Stu, in my opinion. Wes, we did have the one comment we can put up at the end real quick. I thought Stu had a good year. I thought Pistons fans really came to appreciate what he was able to do and capable of, and specifically because he was finally in the role that allowed him to show that and that he's best suited for.
Yeah, no, I thought it was just about a perfect year for Stu, just as far as seeing what he could do in that role. Obviously being the backbone of the defense, despite being with the second unit, like his efficiency going up and being much more efficient around the rim, which had kind of nosedived the last couple seasons as he was playing further out in the perimeter and I think driving more than just getting good catches right in the paint. Yeah, I mean, he was exactly what you want to see in his role. And probably the only area for improvement still is just incorporating that three ball a little bit more. But I mean, beyond that, like defensively, he's exactly what this team needed him to be. And emotionally as well, for the most part. Like maybe there are some times where he overtoed the line a little bit, but beyond that, like he is the emotional leader for this team as well.
Yeah, I know somebody brought up potentially trading Stu, like to some of the injury stuff and all of that. So real quick here with Isaiah Stewart on the season, just not the most flashy numbers, 6 points a game, 5.5 rebounds, and a little under 20 minutes a game, played 72 games. And Marco says Stewart is the heart of the team. I just think he's finally found his role, and I think he's on a really good contract. So he would not be a guy I would be looking to trade unless it was like for the right name, right? Like essentially almost everybody's tradable in some capacity for the right name. He's not a guy that I'd just be like, hey, let's throw him into this to add his $15 million into the trade. I thought we finally saw. I still would like to see the floor spacing come around. I don't know that JB values that as much as what I would, but I think he plays a very valuable role in this team. And I know he missed the playoffs, and I know we've seen other seasons where, he's missed some time, specifically the previous two, but his rookie year, he played 68. The next year, he played 71. He played 72 this season before the playoffs. That's just a guy I would want to keep around right now, especially with the contract in terms of that. So yeah, Wes says Cade is untouchable. Stu is the next guy I wouldn't move. Hot take. Yeah, Cade is good at basketball. Tobias Harris, another guy I think had a really good season, Omari, and I'll read the numbers real quick and then let you go from there. But Tobias averaged 14 points, 6 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 48% from the field, 35% from three, 86% from the free throw line. Those numbers got a little bit better in terms of 16 points in the playoffs, almost 8 rebounds, and shot 48-44, didn't miss a free throw. And he played 73 games, almost 32 minutes a night for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you got everything you could have asked for from Tobias. He truly was the jack of all trades for that they needed. I mean, the same player he was in Philly, previously in Detroit, obviously, LA. He brought all that this season just with the shot making, being a really strong defensive rebounder, especially for his size, the secondary playmaking. Like he even had like a pretty good season as far as blocks and steals. And I thought defensively, like he was pretty good for them. And he definitely stepped up in the playoffs, like not just offensively, but putting up those numbers while also having to defend Cat on the other end and, wrestling him in the paint, possession here or there. Like he had to do a lot, and like he really embraced all of that. So yeah, Tobias, great season, really stepped up for this team, not just on the floor, but as a leader and organizer off of it as well. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. He had a good year, a really good year.
Scott Moorhead says the 4 is where we need to upgrade. I don't disagree long term. I do think is something that they can get better at. That's a position they can grow and improve. Tobias isn't going to be there for much longer. He's 32, but I mean, it's not like he scored 20 a game this year. And just for anybody, his contract situation, he's on the books for 26.5 next year, and then would be an unrestricted free agent the next season. So yeah, and as Michael says, when does the age catch up? Would he need more rest? I think that all plays into like, if you feel better about your 4 position, maybe you can start to do some of that. Maybe even slowly work him into a bench role. I'm interested to see, because I've always seen that contract a little bit as like, hey, this is the $26 million number to go get you, a star player, like in terms of matching salary. But maybe it's just a guy that ends up staying around and he's your backup 4-man for the last 3 years of his career as well. The next player is Dennis Schroeder, who obviously came past halfway through the season in the trade. Thought it was a great move from Trajan. I'm not even going to read off his numbers. I don't even think they tell the whole story. I think anybody who watched the Pistons consistently through the end of this regular season, even the playoffs, saw the value that Dennis Schroeder brought to this team.
Yeah, I mean, again, exactly what they needed, like not just this season, but the last couple seasons as well. Just somebody who could organize the offense. Like he came in, obviously no offseason, like midway through the year, his third team. And like you saw immediately the impact he had, like with the second unit, but also like he played a lot of time with Cade, especially in the playoffs in the fourth quarter. Like, the shot making, like the way he took care of the ball. I mean, and he's feisty defensively too. And because of his size, he's not going to win every matchup, but he's still somebody that can, defend the full floor and be a tone setter in that capacity too. So yeah, Schroeder's exactly what they needed just from a veteran point guard standpoint. He stepped up in the playoffs and he's a guy that like, him and Bees, like in your mind, you think like these guys could probably stick around long term and really continue to help the team in those same roles.
And so just his offseason situation, Schroeder was on a $17 million cap hit this season. They have early bird rights on him, which essentially, guys, they can bring him back. Like as long as they have those early bird rights, they're going to be able to give him the number he needs. Like they'll be fine. Just remember, whenever you're talking about cap space for the Pistons, that means not having these bird rights on a Tim Hardaway Jr., the early bird. Like you're going to get rid of all of those. You're going to renounce those rights. So just remember that whenever people talk about this team having roughly $20 million in cap space, that's saying now you don't have bird rights of any kind on Schroeder, Tim Hardaway Jr., etc. And then if you want to bring those guys back, it's on minimum the cap space you created or the room exception, which I have written down here is 8.7. So just, I want to make sure like we all see that. And that's why a lot of the conversation is around this team operating over the cap. Schroeder's number will be fine in terms of the early bird will get them plenty close. They won't need to get to that number, I guess is my point. He makes sense to bring back O2. I suppose there's an argument that, is there an argument that he's not needed with J.I. coming back? I don't know that I see that argument. I suppose maybe there's an argument of maybe somebody that's a little bit more off the ball offensively that knocks down threes more consistently. Do you even want to mess with it? I don't know. I don't know where I fall on this one.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think you can bring him back. And if, J.I. like is that second, bar handler that this team needs, that, you could make a decision down the road. But I want to see how J.I. looks next to Schroeder. Like I want to see if just having, a guy that could competently handle the ball, for all 48 minutes, what that does for guys who, like J.I., not just him, like before Star and Durant as well, to where now they're having to do a lot less. And now guys are probably more in their correct pecking order as far as having the ball. So I think you could bring Schroeder back and play him and J.I. at times together. I think where it gets dicey is just, okay, like now you have Schroeder and J.I. and Cade and Beasley, and you can't play all these guys at the fourth, so you're going to have some tough decisions to make some nights.
That's all. Chili says, no, we needed him when J.I. was still healthy. I don't disagree. I remember people yelling about the veteran point guard thing. I get it. Just remember minutes are a thing in the NBA, right? Like you just brought up Cade, Beasley, Schroeder, J.I., and Tim Hardaway Jr. as well. So are you going to play small? Okay, so if Tim Hardaway Jr. is playing the three, then who's not playing there between Asar, Ron, Fontecchio? People want Bobby Klintman to play. Well, there's a lot of names here. I'm not saying people are wrong, and I understand that depth matters. I get it. I truly understand. I'm not pushing back in terms of saying people are wrong. I'm just saying make sure we think about all of these different roster decisions in regards to that. Last guy here before we go to break is Bobby Klintman. We kind of got one game, and it wasn't really an NBA game per se. I enjoyed breaking it down. It actually was one of the most viewed posts or whatever, I guess, on my Substack. So I appreciate people for that. I'm interested in Bobby Klintman. I think I had him as a first round grade on my big board, but I don't know that he's ready. I was really impressed with his passing. He's a really good cutter, really interesting player. I don't know where he fits into this equation going into. I don't know how much we can say about last season 02, and I don't know where I see his role coming up this next season yet.
Yeah, like you said, we didn't see a lot of Bobby, but in that last game against Milwaukee, he did a lot of the same stuff he did during Summer League, which is good. That was probably the one chance he got to really show what he could do.
He's the reason to watch Summer League this summer, right? O2,
for sure.
No top 5 pick. So Bobby Klintman is the show in Vegas for the Pistons.
It's going to be Bobby Klintman season for sure. And again, he just does so much interesting stuff. You just think he's a pretty big dude, 6'10". If he can knock down threes, move the ball, and be somewhat decent defensively, he's probably somebody that you could play here and there and like feel pretty good about it, right? Like, I think everything he's done so far has been intriguing. So, yeah, I'm curious to see just what he becomes and if he could eventually carve out a role for this team, because he has shown a lot of interesting stuff so far.
It would be incredible, right? You get a second round pick that comes in and actually fits into the rotation. The other thing I wanted to say about Schroeder, again, I'm just throwing things out for people to think about. You have Cade with the ball in his hands a lot. You have Ivy, who I think a lot of people think should have the ball in his hands, at least some. If you are one of those that wants a Sarr to have the ball in his hands some, or Jalen Duren operating half-court offense, like those are just things to think about in terms of the operate. I don't think there's an overload. Like, I don't. I'm just saying, like, can you get a Dennis Schroeder type player that maybe shoots off the ball a little bit better, right? Like, can you go get Tyus Jones, who I believe in Tyus Jones' ability to knock down shots. Now, the problem with Tyus is you lose something on the other end that Schroeder brings you. And that's why I like Dennis Schroeder quite a bit, because of what he does on the defensive end. We got 5 more guys to get to: Ausar, Ron Holland, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Cade Cunningham. We saved the meat and potatoes for the end of the episode. Make sure you guys were tuning in to the entire thing. We will start off with Ausar Thompson right after this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we're going to talk about Ausar Thompson, obviously a very important player for this team. Bryce, go ahead and lead us off when you're Ausar Thompson thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. And I think the thing so real quick, 10 points a game, 5 rebounds, a little over 2 assists, 2.5 stocks, 22 minutes a game, ended up playing almost 60 games. And then in the playoffs, averaged 11.5 points, 5 rebounds, 22.5 minutes a game in the playoffs as well. I know there was a lot of minutes conversations throughout the regular season into the playoffs. I think we saw the defensive aspect. I mean, listen, Ausar Thompson and Isaiah Stewart would have been in all defensive conversation if either of them were eligible. Neither is, but both would have been. I'm not saying they both would have made it. I'm saying they both would be in the conversation. So I feel pretty good about what I evaluate and feel about Ausar on the defensive end. You and I are going to go back and forth about the offensive end, I think, for the next few years in terms of what you want to see improve or think would be best and what I want to see improve. I think ultimately it's got to be one of these things, right? Like either the handle and some of the shot making and the off ball movement, whether it's the 3-point jumper, whatever. But I think we saw the potential, and I think we saw what his impact can be on the floor.
For sure. And I think, just given the way his season started as well, like no off season.
Yes. That's so important to mention.
Not starting until the end of November. Like, they had no time to really get to know him, right? With an almost entirely new coaching staff, new front office. Like, I don't want to call him a mystery box. Like, you still see what he did last season, but he's such a unique player that, I think for him to figure things out on the fly the way he did, to the point to where he's probably, by the end of the playoffs, your second most important player, just because he's the only person that could not only stand a chance against Jalen Brunson, but actually genuinely defend him, which is massive, because I don't know if anybody else in the playoffs so far has managed to do it to the extent that Ausar has. So all very encouraging stuff, and he has a full off season. They have time, he has time to, improve offensively, whether that's ball handling or shooting or whatever that may be. And they have a full off season to not only, dissect this past season, but, acclimate him even further and tap into those gifts even more. So all very encouraging stuff, for what essentially was an incomplete season for him. And I think that sets him up really nicely going into next season.
Yeah. I mean, you brought it up whenever he wasn't on the floor in terms of the one-on-one matchup of Jalen Brunson, that Detroit just doesn't have anybody else right now, right? You hope that Ron continues to develop with the ability to do that. And then the versatility those two guys together will give you. Again, my big question with Ausar is more so Ausar and Duren together. Can those two figure out how to occupy the offensive half court without consistently getting in each other's way? Or do you always have to have one in the action and those type of things? And it's not going to be a huge regular season issue, because I have a feeling this team will just really play into the defensive disruption and pace that we saw in the regular season. But we all know that pace goes down in the playoffs, and you have to be able to have, half-court offensive execution. I'm glad you brought up the offseason because I think that's the conversation with the Ausar in terms of this coming offseason is he'll be healthy and he'll have the whole offseason to work on the things he needs to work on. I feel like we've talked a lot about Ausar. We can go ahead and move on here to Ron Holland, who, barring a suspension, would have played all 82 games as a rookie. I think has at least a conversation for second team all rookie this year. I don't know that he will make it, but he definitely, even though the stats aren't, eye popping, again, he played 81 games on a playoff team as a rookie. That was impressive to me. The unwavering confidence, the attitude in the most positive way possible. Whenever I use the word attitude in this context was very impressive to me. Some of his finishing and ability to get downhill, especially in transition, got a lot of work to do defensively off the ball and his defensive rotation, rebounding, box out stuff. But for a young player, I was very pleased with what we saw from Ron this season.
Yeah, I thought Ron really showed a lot as a rookie where you're coming into the season and you don't even know what his role could look like, just given that they had added so much depth on just the wing and forward rotation in general, and especially even with the start coming back for Ron to still, carve out minutes. Even if it was only 5-6 minutes here and there, just because every time he was out there, he made an impact in some way, whether it's just his pure hustle or whether it was one of the nights where he was really getting downhill and making those types of plays, or defensively, he always brought something to the table. And, I think beyond that, just the way that he embraced his role, we talked to JB about it a little bit at the end of the season, but just him coming from a G League environment where him and, Buzelis essentially had to create everything to a scenario where you're just taking whatever slice of minutes they could carve out and you got to do something with them. And he attacked that completely, so I think all very good, encouraging signs from him as a rookie. And he's also kind of positioned himself as a guy going forward. That's well, what can he become? Because there's just so many areas of his game that could expand from here that, it's tough to say what he's going to look like next season. He'll be better. He'll continue to have those intangibles. And if he can become a better ball handler or shooter or whatever it is, it's just going to be like this for him.
So Wes, yeah, there we go. Sorry, you were just saying. YouTube user says, is it crazy that Ron Holland's ceiling on offense is the biggest X factor in my mind long term? And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I assume he means for this team in general, which also plays into the second option, Batman Robin. I think we got that question from somebody else as well. Wes, if you want to throw that one up there also. I don't think that that's crazy because as much as I love Ausar Thompson, I don't know that I see second option offensively for Ausar Thompson. I don't see that in Jalen Duren. I'm not saying that it's a great, high outcome. Yeah, so also from YouTube user, is the biggest need a Robin for our Batman, whether that is someone currently on the roster or a trade acquisition. It is for me. I think that is the next step. Now, I wouldn't rush that step was a big thing I want to say here is I want to make sure I know, is it J.I. or is it not? Is it Ausar? Like I said, I don't think it's Ausar. That doesn't mean you don't want to find out. Could it be Ron Holland? One of my high-end comps for him coming into the season or out of the draft was the Jaylen Brown type archetype of player. And, could he become that? Again, I'm not saying there's a high percentage that he becomes that, but is there a world where it could? Sure. And if he becomes that, then you don't have to trade first round picks, Omari, to go get Devin Booker or whoever the next guy is. Not saying he's on the market, but that's the name that always comes up. So it is an X factor for sure, right? That if he would, think about what that catapults this team into. And I think we start to see that next season. I find it hard to believe if we see a similar type season next year for Ron Holland, then he explodes in year 3 or something like that. I'm not saying guys don't continue to get better, but I don't know that we see Robin or option number 2 from Ron if we don't see some substantial growth from him next season.
Yeah, it's tough to, because we saw so little of Ron, I think relative to the other young guys, especially Cade, Ivy, guys had the ball in their hands a lot. I feel like there's still a lot about Ron that can be shown. He was given, again, a slice of responsibility. And, I think he did as much as he could with that. So what else could he show? Could he make a case to have the ball in his hands work? Could he make a case, I'm one of your top defenders. So, you need to be playing these 20 minutes a night, not just, 5 to 10. There's a lot of areas his game could expand. And I think that's what's so, fun with him is just that he's almost more of a blank slate. But, just because of his work ethic and the way he played, that he's going to see big games somewhere. It's just, where is that going to be for him?
YouTube user says, with the Tatum injury, is Jaylen Brown an option? I actually think Boston may do a 1-year reset because of their financial situation and the Tatum injury combined. I assume that reset would not involve moving Jaylen Brown, though. Like, Porzingis, Drew Holiday, maybe you let Al Horford go ahead and walk as an unrestricted free agent. I think those are the more likely moves than something big with Jaylen Brown, or honestly, even Derek White, but that's just how important I think Derek White is to that team. Okay, next on the board here is Tim Hardaway Jr. This will be a fun one because this is another guy where the offseason is an important part of the conversation, but just your thoughts on the season from Tim Hardaway Jr., who scored 11 points per game on 41, 37, 86, and I think ended up top 5 in the NBA in charges drawn. If he didn't, he did in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, he was exactly who THJ is. You look at his career numbers, you look at what he's done in past stops, with the Knicks and most recently with Dallas, and he was exactly that player. Him and Tobias, were the main anchors for the spacing in the first unit. I thought THJ stepped up pretty nicely toward the end when Cade was out. I think he had some of his highest scoring games, in that last 9-10 game stretch. Not a whole lot to say about THJ, honestly. He was exactly as advertised and ended up being pretty good, I think in the sense that he was a reliable shooter, on a team that hasn't had that many of them.
Yeah, no, I thought he brought listen, the way things kind of ended in Dallas, I wasn't sure that was a trade with Trajan. I wasn't sure I loved because I didn't like the idea of trading Quentin Grimes, who we finally get to know what the Quentin Grimes contract is, because I've been saying this for a while that better be a lot if all of these teams decided they didn't want a 3-and-D wing that Quentin Grimes was. So we'll see what that ends up being. But I thought Tim Hardaway Jr. ended up being fine. He played 77 games, played 28 minutes a night. The shooting, at times a heater, all of that stuff. But okay, so Wes, I'm going to ask you to fact check that. But that is a fun fact in the chat, which would be kind of a fun fact if true. I'm not doubting you. I just want to make sure. THJ is interesting, right, Omari? So $24 million cap hold, which they have his bird rights. That cap hold does come into play in terms of operating as an over-the-cap team. The reason you would want to operate as an over-the-cap team is so you have the non-tax MLE for Malik Beasley or somebody else. I see a lot in the chat of Tim Hardaway Jr. has to go. Here's my question, Omari. If you just remove Tim Hardaway Jr. from this team and don't replace him with an upgrade or somebody else, is this team better next year?
I think a lot of that is just that, J.I. is probably going to step into that role. And, obviously just from an athletic standpoint, from a ball handling standpoint, there are upgrades there. I think THJ probably gets the edge in charges. And his main thing is just having a much more substantial body of work as a 3-point shooter, which J.I., we essentially have a 30-game sample size of him being an above average 3-point shooter. So, that's an interesting one because on the one hand, I think that J.I. next season absolutely has a chance to be better than THJ. And, you could argue he was better than THJ this season. At the same time, if the shooting is not real for J.I. and you're still starting some combination of K, J.I., Asar Duran and Tobias, you're going to need some shooting. And, and that's probably the main thing that gives me pause is, do you just slide Malik Beasley in there? How does that affect the rest of the rotation if you're still having some of the same spacing issues with Cade? So I'm not quite there yet. I still think having a 37% shooter that can heat up, does a lot for the offense, even on the nights where that shot's not falling.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that THJ is this problem solver or something like that. I'm that's not the point I'm making. All I'm saying is this role matters. He was second on the team and made threes and shot a solid percentage at it. Now, to your point, J.I. is the guy here, right? I'm just saying we just came off a season where the injury luck was solid, but you lost J.I. for 52 games. You didn't have Asar for a chunk of games. Are we sure you don't want something there? I think who said it here? Scott, J.I. and the replacement. That's where I think I'm at is I don't think you just want to have okay, THJ walks, J.I., Ron, Asar, all those guys are going to take on more minutes. And then you don't have some option as a floor spacer. Maybe that's Sasser. So yeah, I'm with you. I get it. The minute, I'm the one that said it earlier in terms of the minutes and the rotation and all of that stuff. I get it. I'm just, I think it depends on what THJ wants, right? Like,
because obviously they can't offer him the same role.
Yes,
so that's a lot
correct.
of it. It's just what is he going to buy into to come back?
And Chili says JI is the floor spacer. I hope so. Like, I hope so. You won't find a bigger JI fan than me. I hope that is the case. It's just a team that was, and I know this is a little bit unfair, but a team that was 17th in 3-point percentage last year, losing their second best 3-point shooter. All I'm saying is it makes me wonder a little bit. So Hums just said, just check. THJ is actually top 28 all time in threes made. And yeah, past Chauncey Billups this season. So yeah, I just, it's something I think that should be considered in regards to this. I understand the rotational aspects. I understand JI coming back. I am not the guy trying to say Tim Hardaway Jr. is the linchpin of this thing. I'm not trying to say that. I just wonder how we will feel if, Marco, I hear you, man. Like, I'm with you. Where does he fit? It would play. I'm with you. I'm not disagreeing. All I'm saying is remove Tim Hardaway Jr. from the team, and how do people feel about the floor spacing options on the team? That's all I wonder. It's just a question. We got to keep going to Malik Beasley. Obviously a historic 3-point shooting season from him. More than 300 makes this year. Incredible season on the offensive end. The vibes are good. Your thoughts on Malik Beasley this season?
Yeah, again, like not a lot of thoughts, like similar to THJ, but he came in and like whatever expectations, were set before the season, he certainly exceeded them, not just from a shooting standpoint. And, we said this number in here before. I've written it several times, but him and Anthony Edwards became the 4th and 5th players in league history this season to knock out 300 threes. And, Bees did it on like around 42%, which is, elite. So even if he's like 80% of that next season, like he's still, comfortably one of the best shooters this franchise has had in like a while. Like even if that dips to like, 250 threes on like 39 or whatever next season, so of all their free agents, like he's probably like, I think him and Schroeder are the two that you're probably not going to be able to replace what they bring you to the same extent on the market for the price you probably be able to get them here. And yeah, B's obviously thoroughly outplayed like the 1-year deal he signed and, has, earned, some sort of multi-year deal and he wants to be here. So good scenario all around. This probably could not have been a better season for him, honestly, as far as that.
Yeah, like I'm with you. Beasley really knocked down shots this year. It was huge. It was huge for the Pistons to have that off the bench with what he did. I'm interested to see what his market was. Your dad, Omari, brings up, what do you think TH value is to other teams? I'm fascinated to see what Malik Beasley value is going to be to other teams, because incredible regular season for Beasley, and in the playoffs shot 34% on 10 attempts. He still averaged 14 points a game in 27 minutes, but what are they going to do? How are people going to value that in this offseason? Where's the money at? Teams are a little bit different with like their non-tax MLE because they can use it as a trade exception during the season. So I'm just fascinated to see what it would take. I feel like I have a number. I mean, it would be hard for Detroit to, I don't think Detroit can go past the non-tax MLE, but a lot of other teams won't be able to either. So if they max him out at that number, then it just really comes down to, does he want to be here over other teams that would offer him that? So I am with you. Like, just to be clear, I think Schroeder and Beasley would be the guys I would value and bring back as well. But it is kind of interesting. I find myself wondering, Omari, maybe more than others, in like, okay, these were great offensive players. Are there two-way options out there? I think that was my like THJ comment. And even with Beasley a little bit, are there guys out there you could get for similar prices? Maybe you take a little bit of a hit with the shooting, but you get some defensive stuff. It's just interesting to me. I'm not saying I would do it. I don't even know that those names are necessarily out there and would be great, but Beasley's obviously been incredible and I think should be a priority for Trajan this offseason. As you mentioned, people know he is an unrestricted free agent, non-bird rights. It was a 1-year deal. So they do either have to have cap space to sign Malik Beasley or they'll need the non-tax MLE. So Marco, this is the name that I like. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a very interesting name to me, but as you've pointed out, where do you fit him in the rotation? Who does that mean doesn't stay around? So, all right, last one, definitely not least, Cade Cunningham. Second team All-NBA for me, Omari. Not even a question for me that Cade Cunningham should be second team All-NBA, which means he's going to get paid. He's going to get his raise. What were your thoughts on Cade's season?
Yeah, I'd also voted him second team All NBA. I think he was, if not the best guard in the East, like certainly top two, and I think Brunson's postseason performance is keeping him in that conversation. But again, the step forward that Cade took this season was exactly what you would want to see him do after the offseason they had, where arguably, well, not even arguably, it was the first time he had proper support, right? Not just from a shooting standpoint, but also, having bigs who could, anchor and, give him a proper lob threat as well. He averaged, 26 and, 9.5 or something like that. That's even with his 3-point shot kind of fading a little bit toward the end of the season. So you still see room for improvement. Yeah, Cade did everything you would want to see this year. Long story short, he showed that he is for sure a franchise guy you could build around. And after this season, I think that makes a lot of things for the front office easier going forward, knowing that you at least have the main box check.
QT says, let's keep Cade around. Ben says we should keep Cade, and says Cade's pretty good at basketball. We are at this point with Cade Cunningham where we can just kind of joke and be like, he's really good, and we all know he's really good. Yeah, he's incredible season. You brought 26 and 9, 6 rebounds. We know the turnovers, 36% from 3. So just barely hung on there in the regular season. 3-point percentage in the playoffs was not good. The turnovers were not good. And he still averaged 25, 8 and 8, 25, 8.5, 8.5, whatever. Cade Cunningham, good at basketball. Pistons fans should be excited. This is ultimately the thing you have to nail. You have to find the face of the franchise. They have it. He's only going to get better. We can talk about I think the thing that encapsulates the two aspects of his game that need to improve the most is the conditioning. We talked about it with Sean. We talked about it with Koo. I think that is the offseason that has to happen for Cade. I also agree with this. I see some comments talking about players in the league. Cade is easier to build around than Paulo. I will just think, I think Cade is one of the easiest stars to build around in terms of his archetype, because he doesn't have defensive concerns that you feel like you have to make up for, because he is at the very least a neutral defender. And because of that, he makes it a lot easier in terms of the players around him. If the off the ball stuff continued to grow, it would make him even easier to build around. And I do think that's another aspect, because as Wes always yells at me about, having a secondary creator ball handler thing is good and is positive. And my only pushback is, well, then Cade has to get better playing off the ball. But those are good problems to have and things that he can improve on. So any other thoughts on Cade Cunningham, Omari?
Nothing massive. He's the guy. He earned his raise this summer, and now the Pistons have to figure out how to get him the right support to take that next step.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, real quick, we'll go through this. YouTube user, I think the Pistons almost have to operate over the cap, so that means the most likely way to add a sign-in trade. Yeah, and as you mentioned, the cap stuff stinks because it's so hard to figure out. I was even reading here, non-bird rights that they have on Malik Beasley, there's still a percentage and some stuff like that. It just seems like Beasley is going to take more than that. So, Chris, what do you think will pull Herb Jones from the Pelicans? He's someone I'd love for the Pistons to go after. I would say the two guys, if I'm the Pelicans, that I would not trade are Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. If I'm New Orleans, if I'm trading Zion or anything else, I'm keeping those two guys. Tyus, what up, though? 20 past midnight here in Italy. Miss this team so much. Have you already talked about, is you think they should bring a superstar or only make smaller adjustments? We both talked about this, but your quick thoughts on the approach to the offseason, O2.
Yeah, I would be a fan of smaller adjustments. I just unless you're getting a superstar, you're getting Giannis or another star and a deal that just makes too much sense to pass on. I just don't see this as a summer where you have to make a move. You're right at the beginning of your window. With Cade, you still haven't seen enough to me of J.I. or Asar to even be able to value those guys properly to make that type of move. And you also just got all your draft picks back, and you really want to immediately, sacrifice your future and, box yourself in, to a core now. So I would take it slow. I would just get healthy, maybe make a couple tweaks here and there. But to me, this doesn't feel like a big swing summer.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would deadline next year. Guys are always coming available. And while the Pistons finally do have some assets in terms of their draft capital, there's some other teams that have a little bit more. So I would wait a little bit. Ben says, are there any players that could buy low and see them shine? I will just throw out some, like, I have a whole list of like different names of guys that if Detroit does want to play in free agency, I find them interesting. I'm not even sure they're great fits. Aaron Holiday is a player I love when I watch the Houston Rockets. He's actually on a club option though. I don't see why they wouldn't go there. Some more like wingy forward type players. We brought up Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but I'll give a couple other names. Jake LaRavia is an unrestricted free agent. I like his game. Sam Merrill is a name that I think Sam Merrill is very good. And so he's one that maybe, if the role was available would be interesting. And then the bigs, I struggle with a little bit, Omari, because I don't know how a true big comes in here and finds minutes unless they're comfortable being the third guy. But I'm a huge Day'Ron Sharpe fan, and he's a restricted free agent this summer. It's just like, I don't know that Day'Ron Sharpe makes sense when you already have Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. So those are some names that maybe aren't as like eye-popping or eye-catching for people that I have written down just in terms of my list. And then Ben also asked about the expansion draft. I don't know how much you've paid attention to this, but like just listening to the front office show, it sounds like we're a few years down the road from that.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Like when they expand, we could talk about it then. But I mean, to me, you don't worry about something till you have to worry about it, right? Like, why would you pre-worry? So that's just some life advice from O in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's great life advice. Just easier said than done, O2. Like literally my life is predicated on worrying about things that I don't need to worry about. And so,
but you have kids, so it's a little bit different. Like you have more wild cards in your life than I do. So
you
I think
have
that's
no
fair.
idea, man. It's crazy. So, all right, good episode, man. Some of the guys, I felt bad. We rushed through a little bit more than we had to because we got going a little bit on time. I did not expect an hour and 10 minutes on a May 14th episode after the season was over. That gave us a chance to kind of recap the season because probably content moving forward is going to be forward looking and facing. And we will talk about NBA draft stuff eventually. But guys, I'm telling you, there's no point in talking about the second round picks until we see who stays in and who doesn't. Because it's just like, it just isn't, we just don't know. Like this draft is very volatile in that range because of the NIL money that is out there. And overseas players' willingness to go to college and make that NIL money and all of that. So once the draft availabilities are set, I will talk to O2 and we will talk about like at least doing a segment or maybe, a couple players an episode or something like that for 15 minutes and talking about some options there, but not until we have a better grasp because we can end up talking about 5 guys that are playing for Duke and Kansas and North Carolina next year and not even in the draft. So anything else before we let them go, O2?
I think we covered everything. Obviously, we have a lot of other stuff we'll get into as we get closer to the draft and, free agency. And we'll see. But we absolutely kind of wanted to turn the last page on this season and give all the guys their individual due before we dive even deeper into off-season stuff.
All right. Thank you to everybody for joining us, watching, subscribing, listening. Give us the likes and the thumbs up and all of the positivity that you can. Yeah, Mr. Act Like It says, don't forget to like. Really appreciate that. Michael says, great episode, timely. Thank you, Michael. Oh, okay, James, we can do this. Finals prediction. This sucks right now. This is awful. This is disgusting right now. Not because I can't, it's just like, you ain't picking the Celtics as we record right now. I will go Thunder and Knicks.
Yeah, sure.
West goes Pacers versus Thunder.
Yeah, I go Thunder. And I'm probably going to go Pacers at this point as well.
I don't hate it. The Pacers are a lot of fun. I actually get to go talk Pacers tomorrow. If you guys want to listen, I'll be on a Hornets podcast tomorrow talking draft, and then I'll be on Setting the Pace talking just Pacer stuff, like the playoffs and all of that. And guys, please don't hate me. I just really, really like Film Breakdown. If you like my film breakdown just as a basketball fan, I am moonlighting over on Nick's Film School, and you guys can go check those out. I'm sorry. I really love doing film breakdown, and as a chance to continue to do it. So don't get mad at me. But if you like it, you enjoy what I do, I'm doing that over on the Nick's Film School YouTube channel. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazyplayoffs right now. OKC's almost blown a couple games too, where it was like, it's not even going to be the Thunder. So a lot of fun. O2, take it away.
Yes, absolutely. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport as always, and we'll talk to you all next week.